All right, guys, today I'm going to be talking about Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy's book. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is actually the author of this book. It's called The Gap and the Gain. Sorry, I'm looking at Facebook and it's kind of laggy. So hopefully, if anybody's out there watching, you're going to be able to see it. But I love this book. It's not a parenting book per se, but it is an excellent mindset book that can be helpful in business or in parenting and in all relationships. It's just kind of a, personal development book. It's all about mindset. All right. And so I am Dr. Marissa Caudill. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm an adult, child, and adolescent psychiatrist, and you can learn more about me at theparentdoctor.com. You can follow me on socials there, send me any questions. My whole shtick is that I want to empower as many parents as possible to help reduce the growing incidence of depression and anxiety in teenagers. And you, the parents, are absolutely the people who have the biggest impact on teen mental health. And I want to do everything I can to support you in understanding how you can build strong trust and open communication with your kids and help them have a great mindset and a strong identity. A couple of announcements about our group. So the new meeting time going forward, starting in April, is going to be on the third Wednesday of the month still, but at 12 p.m. PST, so that we're not so often late for the East Coast people who are joining us. And then if any of you got a message from me that you won a book way back in December, January from our promotion that we had at that time for the book club, please reach out to me, because there's about 7 or 8 of you who haven't yet reached out or responded, and you did win a book. I want to be able to send it to you. Of those people who have won, I think only 2 of you are in the Facebook group, so I mentioned you in a post today. So go ahead and message me there so I can get your address and send the books to you. Otherwise, everybody who watches this, please go ahead and check your email and see if you have anything saying you won a book, because that was the subject of the email back in December. After today's little lecture, I want you all to check your email. Everybody who has signed up for the book club is going to get an email with the PDF worksheet that I made for this book. And it's got actionable questions for you to do, exercises that I think will be very useful for you. Okay, so let's just dive right in. The basic premise of this book, The Gap and the Gain, is on the surface very simple, but implementing it is actually more challenging. But there are so many examples that Ben Hardy gives in the book about how powerful this strategy is. Basically, this is a visual to help us understand that when we are starting something new and we're imagining moving and progressing towards an ideal outcome, we can either do what we mostly do, what our default tends to be, which is to achieve something, but always be measuring how far we have yet to go. Or we can instead build our awareness and habit of measuring backward from where we started. And in doing that, have a stronger sense of how much we've already accomplished, feel more energized and more propelled to make more progress. So this is the whole gist of the book. Are you in the gap? Meaning, are you measuring from where you are to your ideal, which is unattainable? Or are you in the gain, which is self-determined progress, where you're measuring from where you started to where you are and praising your success? So I think an important thing to keep in mind here is that although an ideal is completely unattainable and therefore is kind of like perfection, which is the lowest standard since we'll never achieve it, it's not in and of itself bad to have ideals. In fact, we all want to have really big wants and really big ideals and really big goals, because those are kind of the compass, the direction that we set ourselves towards when we're defining smaller goals along the way. So we want kind of an infinite game goal, using Simon Sinek's language from his book, The Infinite Game. We want something that is idealistic, that serves humanity, that's unachievable, but that will always keep us busy and working towards something that feels good. All right. So I think we finished this slide. Let's move on. So practicing this being in the gain versus being in the gap is something that we can get better at over time. It's a competency. It takes practice. It doesn't come as easily to some people as it does to others. You know, that old adage, like, is the glass half full or half empty? Optimists tend to see it as half full. They may be more likely to naturally measure how far they've come and to see what they're gaining, whereas many of us are hardwired the other way, to see things as half empty and to see how far we have yet to go and to see what we're giving up or losing out on. How does this come up in our daily life? Well, social media, and for parents and kids, this is especially important, right? There's a lot of good that can come from social media. We can find a lot of friends online, make new relationships online. But 90% of people who use social media are upwardly comparing themselves to some ideal. It's an upward social comparison. So what is that? That's being in the gap. So if you find yourself going on social media to see the person who bakes the perfect cake, or to see the mom whose kids look perfect in the photos, or the person whose house is always tidy, you have to be mindful that that's always putting you in the gap rather than in the gain. You can also use social media to your advantage in terms of teaming up with other people online to measure each other's progress, encourage each other, and be in the gain. But you have to be thoughtful about that, because social media in and of itself is kind of designed to keep us in the gap, to keep showing us things that make us compare ourselves to some unattainable ideal, because that's what gets more views. Then also they talk in the book about victim mentality, kind of being around people who are blaming others, who are externalizing their power, giving away their power, blaming other things and people for why they aren't where they should be. And I think this is increasingly pervasive in our society as well. And we have to be mindful that, again, that is gap thinking. If we're thinking about why things are the way they are and things are happening to us, rather than focusing on what we can do and what we have done to make things better, we're living in the gap. Then he talks about needs versus wants. And I think this is really something that resonated deeply with me. I don't know how many of you grew up in particularly affluent families, or more in families like I had, where money was always kind of a tough topic. And so for us growing up, if I wanted something and it was something that we couldn't afford, I kind of learned that wanting things was bad, because it made my parents feel bad that they couldn't provide for me something that I wanted. So I was taught, not consciously taught, but kind of subconsciously taught, I learned that I shouldn't want things, that wanting things was greedy or excessive, or that my wanting things meant that other people would go without. This is not true, right? And I think this is something as parents that we really want to be mindful about with our kids. Needing something is about externalizing power to another person or thing, because it leads to an obsessive passion. And that's basically, in my course and in my work, I teach parents to think about your inner house of woe, which is your world of expectations. We always have things that don't go according to our expectations, and those cause earthquakes in our house of woe and emotional distress. And we can either live with that distress, or we can remodel our house of woe, change our expectations. And so when we refuse to let go of things and continue to think of them as our needs, maybe you need your partner to do certain things in the relationship and they're failing you by not doing that. Maybe you need your child to achieve certain things or do certain things to make you proud and they're not doing that. So long as you obsessively need those things, you're going to be setting yourself up for disappointment and externalizing your power. Whereas if you want something, you don't need it, then you let yourself be more empowered, more creative, and more connected to yourself and your conscious awareness. So having faith that things are happening for you, not to you, is really what this needs versus wants and victim mentality is all about. Finally, he talks in the book about extrinsic rewards, and specifically a whole chapter about being here and not there. And I think this is so common, right? Like, when I get the promotion, I'll be happy. When I earn this much money, I'll be happy. And he gives many examples of how people can earn more and more and more and still never feel fulfilled, because it's not really about the money. It's about the extrinsic reward, when really what we need to do is be defined by intrinsic rewards. And there's no reason that you can't have those here and now. So we don't want to waste energy justifying what we want, when we could use that for creativity and growth. All right, one second here. So ways to be in the gain. How do we practice this? How do we live in the gain more often? One way is to regularly practice gratitude. This is one of my pillars of empowered parenting. Practice noticing the things that we're thankful for, and do this with our kids on the regular. The second is defining success for yourself. And in the PDF that I'm going to send you all this week, you will get an exercise that will walk you through defining what success looks like for you. It's a really powerful exercise, and I encourage you to spend a few minutes doing that. And also with older kids who are old enough to participate in something like that, have them do that exercise as well and listen to what they say and how they're going to define success for themselves. And finally, mindfulness. So in my course 2, I talk about kind of 3 drivers of our brain, just like you have an old school car, right? Like level 1 autonomous driving, the kind of car that doesn't have cruise control. Probably it's a stick shift. You have to do everything. That's kind of like our downstairs brain. That's like our amygdala and our limbic system. It's just always on alert, always ready to take control, and it's going to be there all the time. But with practice, we can put our upstairs brain in the driver's seat more often. And that's more our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that can reassure us that we're doing okay, that can do things on autopilot, that can have awareness. So that's more like kind of a car that's a modern car with automated cruise control and all of that. And then beyond that, even is when we can tap in through mindfulness meditation, through practicing meditation, through practicing just being aware that we are not our thoughts or our feelings or our behaviors. We're something separate from that. We're the observer of all of that. And that our true self, our conscious awareness is separate the same way that a person playing the video game is different than the avatar within the video game. So that's kind of like level 3 autonomous driver of a car, right? Like the car that drives itself. So using this analogy, you can practice remodeling your house of woe, as I said, letting go of your expectations by allowing the level 3 autonomous driver, your conscious awareness, to remind you that you're not in charge and that it's okay more often. So this doesn't have to be sitting on a mat, meditating, saying Om. It also can just be reminding yourself throughout your day that you are okay and that life is happening for you, even when it doesn't seem like it, even when it seems like things are going wrong. So another powerful part of this book is the idea of freedom from versus freedom to. And when we imagine freedom from, that's really the language of our downstairs brain, of our limbic system and amygdala, our fear centers, our survival brain. And if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and these are Tony Robbins' hierarchy of needs, human needs, basically the lower needs, right? Like food, clothing, and shelter, safety and security, love and belonging, feeling part of a community. These are all things that our downstairs brain needs. This is what the survival brain is concerned with. And then the upstairs brain, the higher level, the freedom to, is really about connection, contribution, self-actualization, self-esteem. So we really can't get to these highest levels of what we have to give the world until we let go of freedom from, until we break from our survival brain being in control and reach our true self, our conscious awareness linked to our prefrontal cortex. So by focusing on our freedom to do things, we can have a much happier life versus when we focus on our freedom from. So when the upstairs brain closes the gate to the downstairs brain, then we can connect to our true self, our soul's purpose, and the infinite energy that stems from that. Excuse me. We're then self-determined because success becomes what we define it to be, not what something in the world or somebody else defines it to be. When we're open to this for ourselves, we can then encourage our kids to discover it for themselves. And that's the most beautiful gift that we could ever give them, to help them open up their hearts to know that they get to forge their own path and to find the own meaning that their life is going to have. And this will really work to eliminate depression and anxiety because they'll know that they're working in their life towards a purpose that's only theirs, and they don't have to compare themselves to anyone else. Now, the freedom from, though, is the downstairs brain, and it's very strong. It's prevalent. It's there all the time, and it focuses on meeting the basal human needs. It's always saying, yeah, but what about this? It increases depression and anxiety by assuming scarcity or worrying about scarcity. And we have to first meet those basic needs of food, shelter, safety, love, and belonging, and valuing ourselves before we can get up here. If you are in a situation or your child's in a situation where you're not having enough to eat, your housing situation is in danger, you're not in a safe environment, it's very difficult, not impossible, but very much more difficult to start living in this freedom to mindset because that downstairs brain is going to be on high alert. All right, so the next exercise in the PDF that I'm going to send all of you is one to define success. And this is a great exercise that's taken from this book. And I encourage you to do it with your children. It'll really be a great bonding experience for you. And using some of these same skills to create self-determined kids in this book, Dr. Hardy talks about an entrepreneur named Lee Bauer, and he created these 6 questions to help him decide whether he would say yes or no to opportunities that arose to him. And I just really like these questions. And I think they have immense power, especially as your kid becomes a teenager, starts to ask you if they can do certain things. If you've taught them beforehand to start thinking about their decisions for themselves and what it means for themselves, and is it aligned with their intrinsic values, um, they're going to decide, hopefully on their own, the right choice for themselves. And that takes away you having to be the bad cop or the limit setter. So this is the series of questions. Ask, is this opportunity, person, expense, adventure, experience aligned with my values? Will this opportunity take advantage of my unique ability and make me even stronger? Will it lengthen my stride? Will it make me better at whatever it is I'm here on earth to do? How will this opportunity benefit mankind? Is there a bigger cause or purpose that will benefit society? Does this make sense financially? Is this transactional or transformational? I love that. In other words, is this a standalone opportunity or a gateway opportunity? Just thinking back to my own mind as a teenager, there were so many things that I got really angsty about that were totally transactional. Like, can I go to this concert or something, right? It feels like life and death, but it really isn't. Like, that is not a transformational event. And I think talking about this with our kids can really help to diffuse some of the tension that comes out of decisions of yes or no. Can you do this? Should you do this or not? And then finally, if I say yes to this opportunity, what then must I say no to? So again, this comes up too, like if your kid wants to do a new sport or a commitment or whatever it is, then you have to think about, okay, does it make sense? Are you going to be okay with the flip side of the things that you'll have to let go of? I found this very fascinating. So Seneca was a philosopher in Rome right around, like, he died in 65 AD, but he supposedly said lots of really smart things. So one of them is the term euthymia, which he defined as knowing that you're on the right path and not led astray by the many tracks which cross yours of people who are hopelessly lost. Now, in psychiatry, as a psychiatrist, I was trained to understand that euthymia means absence of mental illness. And I think this is pretty interesting, right? Because it's not a coincidence. I have started to think about mental illness as arising always from overactivation of the downstairs brain, of the survival brain. And really, this is right aligned with that, right? Like, when you know that you are in alignment with your true purpose and you're defining your values based on who you are, then you can be euthymic. Until then, it's almost impossible to be euthymic, because if you are assuming everybody else's values or trying to meet their ideals and you're not in connection with what yours are, you're never going to be in alignment and you're never going to be at peace. So I think one thing that we can teach our kids is this idea that he presents in the book called one question filtering. And he gives this great example of a British rowing team that had never won any medals. And they decided to just ask themselves one question in everything they did. And it's, will it make the boat go faster? And this determined, their training, what they did on the boat, what they did with their equipment, what they did with their coaching, everything. And if the answer was no, they just didn't do it. So, and if the answer was yes, they did it, and they did it wholeheartedly. So this is a powerful tool as well when we're working with our kids and they have a goal. Hopefully it's one that they've decided upon themselves, an intrinsic goal, and not one that we or their life or school is imposing on them, an extrinsic goal. If it's an intrinsic goal, then help them figure out what's the one question that they need to filter all of their decisions through. What's the, will it make the boat go faster question? Now, as they start working towards that, we have a lot of power, given that we've had longer lives and more experience, to help them understand the process of change through storytelling. So this here is The Emotional Cycle of Change, as outlined by Don Kelly and Daryl Conner. They were 2 psychologists who wrote in 1979 this paper outlining what happens. And I'm working with a coach through Tony Robbins who calls this portion the shithole. So basically, when we start a new thing, what do we start with? We start with energy. We're excited. Oh, it's not popping up here. Why? Let me go back. Hold on. Oh, my image isn't coming up on this page. I don't know why. Sorry, guys. Well, wonder what I can do. Let's hold on. New share. All right. Hopefully you can see it here. When we start a new project, then we start with uninformed optimism. Our emotions are high and good. We feel positive. And then we go along, some things start to go wrong, and we start to have informed pessimism. We realize it's going to be a little harder, a little more difficult than we thought. And at some point you reach the nadir, which is the valley of despair or the shithole, when basically you just start to feel like everybody else is better at this than I am. What is the point? You start having all those negative thoughts. And that's a point when lots of people just give up, turn around, and maybe they start the cycle again. And if you do this repeatedly, you start to develop the story of like, I'm just not meant to do anything. I'm not successful. Success isn't in my future. I'm not good at this. I'm not smart, whatever the story is that people tell themselves. It's only when you push through the valley of despair that you start to slowly have informed optimism. You start to do things enough times with repetition, even though you failed, you get back up, and eventually things start going your way. And then you get some momentum with that, and you get to informed optimism. And finally, you get to success and fulfillment. So we have a lot of power when we're talking to our kids to give examples from our own life or other ancestors within our family's lives about times when they went through this emotional cycle of change, to help our kids learn through others' experience that they can relate to, that this is normal. And that when you start something new, you're going to go from the natural high of excitement to the low of realizing how hard it is, to the lower of realizing it's really hard and you really don't feel like you're ever going to be good at it, before you finally start to have some competency and see some success. And that's how it goes. That's just how life is, right? Let me share my screen again. All right. So then they go on to talk about something that Tony Robbins also talks about, which is we get to create the meaning from our past. We get to rewrite our story in the present moment by being in the gain rather than in the gap. So don't look for meaning from past events. Pain is inevitable. We create the meaning by how we respond to painful events. And he gives really difficult examples of people who lost their children, people whose marriages ended, all of these people who went through incredible hardship, but they didn't dwell on it in a negative way. They let it redefine their life in a way that gave them more meaning and more hope. So any hardship can be used to improve your life if you decide to live in the gain rather than in the gap. So what we can control is the now. The past is a story. It's influenced by our present moment. We can choose to look at the past in the negative, or we can choose to look at the past as something that's going to make us stronger and propel us into a brighter future. We control the present, and that dictates the future. And that is my last slide. So I don't actually think there's nobody here. I hope I'm in the right group. Sorry guys if I messed something up with the link. Let me go to the Facebook Live and see if anybody's here. I don't see anybody here yet. So I do want to let you know that next month we are going to be meeting at 12 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday, and it's going to be the third Wednesday again, which is, tell you, the 17th of April. So it'll be noon Pacific, 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. East Coast. And the book that we're going to be reading next time is Mindset by Carol Dweck. She is a professor of psychology at Stanford, and she did incredible research in the 90s about grit and persistence that has been then utilized by future researchers to talk about and research like what gets kids motivated to do their best. And so that's something that I know all of us parents want to learn about. So I'll see you guys all then. Take care.